said, I know, but I can't get there when he wants to do it at 3 o'clock. I said, no, it's gonna be later than that. I said, I'm going one day, I don't know what day they're going, but and then we could set it up. I'm gonna knock out most of mine there in one day.
And I told Mike to come by and talk to me, and we'd get him either set up on his own or
He said he wants to come to me and me and him with him.
yeah, and if we all need to come on a Saturday or whatever to get, when Mike can, that's fine.
My name is Sandy Thompson, and I am the Director of the Office of State and Local Finance. I would like to introduce to you our local government finance team, and that's our staff here in the Office of State and Local Finance in the Comptroller's Office. We have Sheila Reed, who's our Assistant Director, and we have Ron Queen, Steve Osborne, and Lori Barnard, all financial analysts in the office as well. They're here to talk to you about the tools we have all been given to be successful in our jobs, as well as be good stewards for the state of Tennessee citizens. They are here to help and are a great resource if you have questions, need help with a budget question, or what to do to submit a request for approval to issue debt. Consider them as tools in your toolbox as well. So what do we do in the Office of State and Local Finance? Well, first of all, we have oversight of local government financial management compliance. We review and approve all county and municipal budgets. We provide reports and or approvals on debt for certain types of debt. And we review, analyze, and retain all reports on debt obligation. And we monitor and ensure that investments are authorized by law. We have a lot to be proud of as citizens of Tennessee. We are a triple A rated state. Just one of 12 states to have that prestigious distinction. In addition to that, and just as impressive, the state of Tennessee has an institutional framework that's very highly rated as well. The Comptroller is especially proud of this. And we are only one of 3 states that's received an overall score of very strong for our institutional framework. To determine overall institutional framework scores, the states are scored on the following sub-factors that range from a score of 1 or very strong to a score of 5 or very weak. The first item that we're scored on is predictability. And this assesses the extent to which a local government can forecast its ongoing revenues and expenditures. We're also scored on our revenue and expenditure balance. This assesses the extent to which local governments have the ability to finance the services they provide. The third item we're scored on is transparency and accountability. This assesses the overall state's laws, policies, and influence in encouraging or requiring the transparency and comparability of relevant financial information. And the fourth item that we're scored on is systemic support. This is the extent to which a local government receives extraordinary support from the state government when the local government is under extreme stress. The Comptroller, along with the General Assembly, has created a toolkit for all of us in order to set us up to be successful in the roles as we serve the citizens of Tennessee. These so-called tools are all a part of our state's institutional framework, a framework that is comprised of laws, policies, procedures, processes, again, all in place to help us to be successful in what we do every day. This includes ensuring that we are good stewards of the monies we receive from our tax-paying citizens, only spending money on expenditures that have been appropriated for, and ensuring that we spend within our means, for we cannot spend that which we do not have. It also requires us to plan for the future for upcoming capital expenditures, such as new sewer lines, or capital maintenance, such as repairs on an existing system. So now I present to you one of the tools in your toolkit from our local government team, Steve Osborne.
Thank you, Sandy. So today we're going to talk about debt issuance for utilities in Tennessee, and we're going to start with principles of debt issuance. The top bullet point, want to make sure that you, being cities, counties, water authorities issuing debt, the cities or the counties, you're issuing your debt at the municipal level, the city council, board of mayor and aldermen, or the county commission, and not at the water district level. These next 4 bullets we're going to take in more detail here in a minute, but want to let you know that bonds and notes are only to be issued for capital projects, or as statute says, public works projects. And a city or a county may not mortgage its property when issuing debt. We're going to talk about what you can secure your debt with here in a second. Assets may not be financed longer than their useful life. And all entities must have an adopted debt management policy prior to authorizing the issuance of any debt. And if you issue debt after you've issued that debt, that places you under the budget approval process of the comptroller's office. We're going to talk about that more in the second section. So we talked about you can finance capital projects with bonds or notes. Well, what is a capital project? Statute gives this wonderful definition of it's a project to construct, acquire, reconstruct, improve, better, or extend the life of a facility or system. But what does that mean in layman terms? It means you can borrow money for water or sewer lines, for a water treatment plant, pumping stations, or even for maintenance vehicles or earth-moving equipment. Well, what is not a capital project are working or operational loans or improvements to a private business. So you may issue bonds to run a water or a sewer line down Main Street. You just can't do anything off of Main Street for a private business. So I said you couldn't mortgage your property, but how can you secure your debt? And so the 2 types of securities you can issue debt under are revenue or general obligation. Revenue being available to all cities and counties and water authorities, and it is basically securing the debt by the revenues of the system. So you charge a rate, and that rate goes to pay your bonds back or your notes. And so by issuing revenue debt, and it's not backed by any taxing pledges, it makes that debt a little bit more risky to an investor. So when you issue revenue debt, there tends to be what's called covenants or promises that prove to the investor that you will repay that debt. A couple of the most prominent ones are a debt service reserve fund. And this is where you fund a fund that has equal to one of your max annual debt service payments. So you have your largest debt payment is $100,000 for the year. You'll have a debt service reserve fund for $100,000. And in case there's a storm or something and you don't have revenue for a while, that fund will pay the debt service, and it makes it a little more palatable to investors. Also, you may pledge to carry a certain debt coverage ratio, and more than likely you will. Something like 1.2 or 1.25 times debt coverage. So that $100,000 of debt, if you agreed to have revenues that are 125% of that amount in order to cover your debt service. And also priority of payments, also called a lien type position. So you may have debt with a senior lien position, and that senior lien position, those debt receive the first revenues. Later on, you may issue junior lien bonds, and those bonds will pay out in a secondary manner. You may also have something called parity, where both bonds pay equally. Also, general obligation, and this is just the straight taxing power of the city or the county. This is not available to water authorities, but you are pledging your ability to raise taxes, your ability to raise your property tax to cover this debt. Now, this is the most secure, and sometimes people do issue GO pledge, and they also back it with the power of a revenue pledge, and sometimes these are called double barrel bonds because they have both securities on that debt. So we're going to take a little bit of a scenario here and talk about the debt issuance decision. So we're going to look at the issuance of debt for a water treatment plant or perhaps for an excavator. Now you have to take a look at this and say, well, do I want to issue debt or do I want to use my cash reserves? More than likely, no matter the size of your utility, if you're building a new water treatment plant, you're going to have some portion of that be debt issuance if it's a large enough project. But a smaller utility may have to issue all of that amount to purchase the water treatment plant or to construct the water treatment plant, or perhaps to buy the excavator. treatment plants, the first foray into utilities, you may have to issue a general obligation pledge in order to get the debt and price into the market. After you've been established for a while, or if you're a water authority, you have a choice, you would need to issue revenue debt. And so both the new water treatment plant or the excavator in that case. Now, taking a look at the length of the debt. So with a water treatment plant, the life of that treatment plant might be 30 years. You could issue debt. Remember, we said you can't issue beyond the life of the asset. Well, you could issue debt for 30 years for that water treatment plant. Whereas the excavator may only have a life of 7 years, and therefore you could only issue debt for 7 years to cover that excavator. If you were to issue both of these under the same debt, you can blend the two together to come up with an average life. And that might be at, say, 27 years or something like that. So, but just because you can finance the water treatment plant for 30 years, you have to ask yourself the question, should I finance this for 30 years? You may be able to afford the payments at 20 years and save some interest costs by not financing for 30 years. Thus the affordability there. Now, but let's say, for instance, you do need to issue money for the treatment plant, the bottom of the slide here, the sizing of the debt issue. How much debt can I issue? So you can issue debt to cover the entirety of the water treatment plant. Let's say it costs $10 million. You may also finance for the interest payments during the construction period. So for the 2 years that it takes to construct a water treatment plant, you won't receive any revenues from that treatment plant. You may do what's called capitalize the interest and issue an extra amount of debt to cover those 2 years of interest payments and to waive the principal payments during those 2 years. So you may also issue debt to cover what's called the cost of issuance. And this is to pay the professionals involved, and we're going to learn who they are here in a minute. And you may fund that debt service reserve fund that we talked about a few minutes ago. So all of those items can be financed with bonds. So now, if you decide you are going to issue bonds, and we're going to learn more about what a bond is here in a minute, you have to have a debt management policy. So in 2011, anybody, all cities, counties, water authorities, even the state, had to have an adopted debt management policy prior to authorizing the issuance of any debt. And so the four basic principles that we see here set forth is known as the Wilson Doctrine, after our beloved comptroller Justin P. Wilson. And the principles are all debt management policies, you should understand the transaction. I like to say, if you don't understand the transaction, ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Make sure you understand that transaction. Because number 2 here, explain to citizens what is being considered. You may have to explain to the citizens why you're considering what you're considering. You need to ask questions. And that's the professionals you're working with, anyone involved in the deal. This debt management policy is going to help avoid conflicts of interest. And this is all around the board. And the team we're going to talk about here in a minute. And it's going to disclose all costs and risks associated with the debt issuance process. And a good debt management policy should be designed to provoke better financial decisions. So, and I'm going to take that along with this last bullet that distinguishes policy decisions from transaction decisions. You can see how if you start ahead of time and you say, this is what we want to do. We want to issue debt, but we don't want to issue variable rate debt. When the time comes to issue debt, you don't have to consider variable rate debt. You go straight to fixed rate debt because you've made that decision in the past. And bullet 2 here, it provides clear objectives to the staff. Well, staff knows, and they're part of the team, that you don't want variable rate debt. So you're not going to issue variable rate debt. And the 3rd bullet, demonstrate strong financial management practices to credit rating agencies. So if the issuance of debt, if your prime target is to build a water treatment plant, but you want to do that as cheaply as possible, that means you need a lower interest rate. So a good credit rating equals a lower interest rate, all other things considered. So let's talk about balloon indebtedness. In 2014, the House and the Senate passed what's called the Balloon Indebtedness Law, or the Anti-Kicking the Can Law. And this is to curb the issuance of balloon indebtedness and to have only balloon indebtedness issued that is in a public's interest. So what is balloon indebtedness? Balloon indebtedness delays the repayment of principal to further years during the debt issuance process. For instance, you may issue 30-year debt, and there have been some cases where principal is only indebtedness. Because of that, it results in higher interest costs. And remember, we're trying to issue debt that's got the lowest amount of interest costs possible because we want to save money for our rates. It can limit future borrowing capacities. You can imagine if you have large principal payments out in year 29 and 30, your next debt issuance is going to have to go around that, and this becomes a cycle as you move forward where you're issuing debt to go around other debts. That's not a good cycle to be in. It burdens future generations with costs and no benefit. Remember, your treatment plant was going to last 30 years. If you don't pay for it until the end of that time, the people at the end are paying for that, and they've got no use of it because you've got to remodel it at that time, put new products in it. It may lead to the erosion of credit ratings. And so back a slide, we talked about how debt management policy could improve your credit rating. This would perhaps erode your credit rating. And it is generally not in the public's interest for all the items that I've listed.
Got an iron done that.
That's a quick hour.
It's all time lapse.
That old man is married yet.
That's it. Here we go.
Breaking down the statute, it's a long and complicated statute, but I played a few of the items on here to say what makes something balloon indebtedness, and then also what makes something not balloon indebted. So if you have debt that repays principal 31 or more years, so beyond the 30-year point, it becomes balloon indebtedness. But we're going to exclude USDA loans in a second. Principal repayment is delayed more than 3 years, and the next one is talking about capitalized interest. If you remember a few slides back, we talked about it takes 2 years to build the water treatment plant, and you may delay principal repayment and capitalize interest for that 2-year period. Statute says it can be a 3-year period, but if it's longer, if it goes for 4 years, you're going to have to get approval under the balloon indebtedness law. And the last bullet point says does not have substantially level or declining debt service. So that is defined in statute as being greater than 5% or $10,000 greater than the prior lesser amount of debt service. Basically, if you have something that looks like mortgage debt, it repays with each month or each year, it's not balloon indebtedness. But we also have items that make stuff not balloon indebted, and that is if you have short-term bonds or notes, or just bonds in this case, where 75% of the principal amortizes in 10 years, and you don't have one balloon payment that is bigger than 25% in any given year, it's not defined as balloon indebtedness. Also, if you have a good credit rating, remember, we talked about credit ratings, if you have a credit rating in the top 2 tiers with either Moody's, S&P, or Fitch, that is not considered to be balloon indebtedness, but it is limited to the revenue stream or the security pledge, revenue versus GO. And it does not, a GO, AAA does not constitute not balloon indebtedness for a revenue pledge. And like I said earlier, debt issued for USDA or HUD loans is excluded. You can still issue 40-year USDA loans. And if you're issuing notes that we're going to learn about in a second, approved by the comptroller, they too are excluded. So, now that we've talked about some basic principles, let's talk about a few items of debt that are accessible to water systems. And we're going to talk about revenue and general obligation bonds together. We're also going to talk about the state revolving fund and their loan agreements. We're going to talk about capital outlay notes. USDA loans are accessible to you. And we're going to talk briefly about grant and bond anticipation notes. So bonds, we've kind of brushed on this a little bit, but bonds are generally used to finance assets with longer lives. It's that water treatment plant that we keep talking about. They may have maturities up to 40 years, but remember, more than 30 is considered balloon indebtedness. They may require the use of professional help. Generally, they will require the use of professional help, and we're going to learn who that professional help is here in a second. They may be backed by a revenue or a general obligation pledge, or both, as we learned about a few minutes ago. And they may be secured as a private placement, a security, and that private placement may be with a single investor. So you may sell these bonds to an underwriter, and they may turn around and sell them to a number of investors, or this debt may be sold to a bank that's the sole investor in your bonds. And also, lastly, bonds tend to have a call date. Example, 10 years is the most common, and this says I'm going to issue 30-year debt, but I'm not going to be able to call this debt, refund out of it, or purchase it back from the investor for a period of 10 years. So this allows the investor to know they're going to receive revenue for 10 years, and we're going to talk about refunding bonds here in a second. So we talked about the debt issuance team, the cost of issuance go to pay their salary, but who are they? First and foremost, you've got the underwriter or a bank, and they're the person that is going to buy your debt from you. The underwriter is going to buy your debt and redistribute that to other investors, and they're going to take a percentage off the top for their services. Banks, on the other hand, more than likely just going to charge you an interest rate. Also on this team is the registered municipal advisor. And I want to point out here that now law says that the municipal advisor must be registered with the MSRB. So you want to make sure when you hire one that they are registered with the MSRB. The municipal advisor has to have has a fiduciary responsibility. They have to have your best interests at heart. The underwriter or the bank does not. You need to keep that in mind when issuing debt, that you have the financial advisor has to have your best interests at heart. Also on this team is bond counsel. So bond counsel is going to be responsible for talking about the legality of the debt. Can you issue this debt legally in Tennessee? Also, to talk about the taxable nature of this debt. Is this a tax-exempt bond? Because the investors will pay less for the tax-exempt bond, or take less in payment for a tax-exempt bond. And so this is an important process. You also may have your local counsel involved, sometimes called issuers counsel, just to see if your best interests are at heart. And finally, you and your management team are going to be a part of this for the city, the county, or the authority. So every time you issue debt, your financial team working for you are going to be part of this process. So I mentioned refunding bonds a minute ago. So what is a refunding bond? It is a bond issued to repay any of your currently outstanding bonds. There are two types of refunding bonds. Current refunding, that means that call date that we talked about. When the bonds are callable, you may issue new bonds up to 90 days before that call date. If it's greater than 90 days, it becomes an advance refunding. Now, recent acts by the federal government stop the issuance of tax-exempt advance refunding bonds, but you can still advance refund a taxable issue. So why issue refunding bonds? There are three reasons to issue a general obligation refunding bond. We've listed here for savings. For instance, you issue bonds at a higher rate, and now interest rates have come down, and also the debt is shorter. It's no longer 30-year debt, it's 20-year debt. And you may issue refunding bonds for savings. You may also issue refunding bonds to remove interest rate risk. Let's say, for instance, you issued variable rate bonds in the past, and now you've decided, well, rates are kind of moving around on me. I would like to issue fixed rate debt. You may do that if the bonds are callable. You may also issue debt to restructure prior debt. So we're going to talk about default here in a minute. We don't want to make that as an option, but you may reissue debt. So you've lost a customer, large customer, and you have a lesser of a revenues at this point. You may restructure your debt to prevent default. Now, with revenue bonds, those three items are the only reason you may issue revenue bonds. posted in statute. It's called savings to the public, the same as before, are to remove and modify restrictive covenant. Remember we talked about those covenants before, and the issuance of those covenants was a security measure for the investor. Let's say now you've been around for 10 years and you think you can issue debt without such restrictive covenants and take some of that money out of the debt service reserve fund, place it back into the coffers of the city or the county, or recall your debt with it. So, and you may also issue debt to prevent default. So, what happens with the refunding bond? So you've decided that you can issue bonds for savings, and so what are the next steps in this process? So you need to come up with what's called a plan of refunding. You'll issue that plan of refunding to the comptroller's office, and we will provide a report on the refinancing. Your plan of refunding will include a cover letter from the CEO, the mayor, the county executive, and a few of the water authorities are under this process. You will tell us what the use of the proceeds are for. So the savings, removal of a constrictive covenant. We'll provide amortization schedules for the currently outstanding debt or the refund debt bonds, and amortization schedules for the new money bond or the refunding bonds, or the money that's new to pay the debt off. We're also going to provide with the cost of issuance and who is part of the professional team you hired. And you're going to provide all prior CT-0253 forms for the prior debt. We're going to learn about what that form is here in a few minutes. The comptroller's office will then issue you a report. Now I want to make a note that that report has a 90-day expiration date. So only start this process when you're ready to work all the way through and end it with the issuance of the debt. Now, the comptroller's report is a homogeneous report all the way across the state of Tennessee, whether you're in Memphis or Mountain City, doesn't matter the size of your entity. We're going to issue a report that is the same, and it's going to present in layman terms the foundation of the refunding. It's going to tell everybody involved, so your board and the citizenry and anyone at the open meeting, what this refunding looks like. You will present this report at an open meeting in which you plan to adopt the authorizing resolution for the refunding bond. Once you've done that, you authorize the resolution, you're ready to issue the debt. So, the state revolving fund loans that we talked about a few minutes ago, are loans approved by the Tennessee Local Development Authority, and they are administered by the Office of State and Local Finance. You may have heard of this program, but they have loan maturities for two different types: clean water or sewer, or drinking water. The sewer loans can be up to 30 years. The drinking water loans can be up to 20 years. Now, some of these include a possible principal forgiveness if the money is available from the federal government for this. The interest rates are based on an ability to pay index, which is a computation done by Environment and Conservation, so you may receive a rate that is below market rate based upon your ability to pay. Now, I want to note that the loan proceeds are made on a reimbursement basis, and you must spend the money on the project, and then you're reimbursed by the state for your spending. Just like we talked about revenue debt, there are some guidelines that you must adhere to if you enter into an SRF loan. These are covered by both the loan document and by the guidelines and policies of the TLDA. So if you issue a TLDA loan and then you plan to issue more debt in the future with the same security in your city or county, it is asked that you have to notify the authority within 45 days of issuance of that debt. If you're a water authority, you must seek approval to issue any debt, including refunding bonds. Now, we talked about lien position earlier. So it's expected that when you issue an SRF loan, all your prior debt becomes senior to that SRF loan, sorry. And if you issue more debt in the future, that debt will be junior to the SRF loan. If you choose to issue that debt senior or on parity with, you must ask approval of the TLDA. And there are loan covenants, just like we talked about a few minutes ago, associated with these loans, and timely payments are expected. Moving away from bonds and into notes are a shorter term debt instrument. These are general obligation backed capital outlay notes. We're going to talk about 3 of them. We're going to talk about bond and grant anticipation notes also. And the approval process is relatively simple. You adopt a resolution at the governing body level and request approval of the comptroller's office from the mayor or the CEO. A few other items with that. We're going to discuss them here with the notes. Like I said, 3 types of notes. The first is a 3-year note. It can be extended 2 times for a total of 9 years. It is a completely different note each time and a different process to enter into that note each time. You may enter into this note either negotiated or competitive, and it must repay for level principal. So if you enter into it, if you plan to use it for 9 years, that would be 1/9 the principal each year amortized. Now, your asset life would need to at least be 9 years. But there's interest rate risk each time you extend this note. So there's also the 12-year note, which can be anything greater than 3 up through 12 years. The difference is you enter into the note for the complete amount of time, say 7, 9 years. You mitigate interest rate risk. It's just different in how you enter into this note. You may enter into it competitively for any amount up to $5 million. It can be competitive on a local basis, over $5 million competitive on a national basis. You may also use the informal bid. This is where you contact 3 banks. We recommend more because you get a better interest rate possibly. Anything up to a $2 million loan, you can use the informal bid. You report to the comptroller the name of the banks, fees charged, and that you can enter into this debt and amortize it along with all your other debt and seek approval of the informal bid. This debt repays with a level mortgage type principal repayment debt structure. There's also the land purchase agreement, which is for the fee simple purchase of land, say from the landowner, a farmer who doesn't want the land anymore, but would like to receive payments over a 10-year period. It can be 10 years, but it must repay in level principal over that 10-year period, and it must be for a public works project. So, bond anticipation notes. Think of a bond anticipation note as a short-term note that gets you through the construction process. We talked about that 2-year process for the water treatment plant. Instead of issuing bonds at the beginning, you may issue a bond anticipation note, short-term note repaid with the issuance of the bond. The thing to keep in mind here, although it can be revenue, it can be general obligation, has a 2-year term, but there's one more step in the process. You must already have authorized the issuance of the bond, publish the authorizing resolution, and if it is a general obligation bond, waited through the protest period time. Then you may seek approval of the comptroller's office and issue these by negotiated or competitive sale.
We're gonna move on to the next 15 minutes. If anybody's gotta get up and use the restroom or anything, go ahead.
The last debt we're going to talk about is the grant anticipation note. Now, I'm going to tell you what it is for the knowledge of a grant anticipation note, and then I'm going to talk you out of using it and talk you into using a capital outlay note. So, these may be used for any grant that's a capital grant. Can be used for operating grants, and it's adopted by a resolution like all notes, and it's got a life of 3 years, not to exceed 7 years. It's a really long grant if you go out 10 years. But the thing to keep in mind is the principal may only be repaid by the grant and not by any tax dollars. So this makes this note a little riskier because if the grant doesn't materialize, you have to figure out how to repay this on your own. And this is the portion of the grant that's coming to you. You're just pre-funding it to get started on the project. You can use a capital outlay note in order to do the same thing, and it's a little less risky. So we're going to move now into our section 2, and Sheila Reed, the Assistant Director of the Office of State and Local Finance, is going to take this. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Steve. Let's talk some now about what happens after we issue debt. We're going to talk about post-issuance. We're going to look at the report on debt obligation, budget approval, MSRB and other compliance reporting, non-conforming obligations, debt default, and we're going to close with a fun quiz. The report on debt obligation. This report is required by state law. It's required for all debt obligations. If you have a capital lease, if you have a loan agreement with a bank, if you issue bonds, any type of debt that you've issued, this report is required to be completed within 45 days after debt is issued. And the report is to be given to your governing board with a copy to our office, the Office of State and Local Finance. When you see the report, you're going to see that it describes the nature and the details of the transaction. It's going to tell you the type of debt and the amount issued, the purpose for issuing the debt, interest cost of issuance, how much did it cost you to issue this debt, and it's going to give a summary of your principal maturity dates and the amounts paid on those dates. We have a fillable form available on our website, and you can submit that through our email address. And I've included a snippet, just a small snippet of the form to let you know, just to get an idea of what it looks like. It's a very straightforward form. We've tried to design it to be intuitive where you can just go through and fill it out. But this is something that's going to apply to every entity at the state level and the local level. All public entities have to file this form with their governing board and our office. Budget approval. If you issue debt under the authority of Title IX, Chapter 21, you are going to fall under the purview of the Office of State and Local Finance as far as budget approval. And what that consists of, our review, we're going to look at your budget and we're going to say, is it balanced? Or do you have enough revenues coming in to pay for operating costs and non-operating costs? We're going to look to see, have you budgeted for debt service? Do you have enough money to pay for your principal and your interest? We're going to take a look at your cash flows. We're going to see how healthy your cash balances look. We're also going to look for compliance with the Water and Wastewater Financing Board requirements, which we're going to make sure you budgeted for depreciation. We're going to make sure your net position looks good. And back to the debt service, we're going to make sure you've budgeted for debt service. And after our review, we will send your government a letter describing the results of that review. And this requirement, the approval requirement, will be applicable as long as that debt is outstanding. The Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, this is an organization that was created in 1975 after Congress had determined that there needed to be regulation in the municipal bond market. And they have certain requirements for debt issued in regard to municipal bonds. And there's a continuing disclosure agreement often whenever you issue bonds, and there's certain specific events required by SEC Rule 15C2-12 whenever you issue debt in the municipal market. And of note is that this winter of 2019, there are going to be 2 additional event notice requirements. This went through a lot of deliberation, and the market, there's been a lot of bank loans in the past several years, and they're responding to this. And one of the new requirements is for any material financial obligations, that's bank loans, guarantees, capital leases, to be reported on EMMA, which is the Electronic Municipal Market Access System. Again, it's transparency. It's transparency for the investors so that they know what type of additional debt that you're issuing. And if there's any changes in those financial obligations, you're also going to need to report that on EMMA. And like if the financial obligation goes into default, or if there's a modification of terms, which is often an indication that there might be financial distress at the government, a modification of terms might be where you ask to extend the repayment of that debt. But this is a big change in the municipal market, and this is required if you have bonds outstanding. If you don't have bonds outstanding, this does not apply. And then other, like Steve referred to earlier, the TLDA SRF loan program, they have certain requirements. And if you enter into a bank loan, a lot of these organizations, the lenders, they want to see your audited financial statements. A lot of times they're looking for that within 6 months. They want to see how you're doing, how you're looking financially. Post-issuance policies and procedures. I've gone over the different requirements at the state level, at the federal level. One of the things that we recommend is that you develop some post-issuance policies and procedures. And what you're going to do is just going to be like a list where you're going to identify your federal requirements, your state requirements, and your local requirements. And we'll want to assign a specific staff member that will be responsible to make sure that you comply with those ongoing requirements. And the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, they have great guidance on their website in regard to some recommended policies and procedures for this. Non-conforming obligations. Every now and again, a local government will find themselves where they have entered debt in what the Tennessee law defines as non-conforming. And basically that means that the debt issued did not conform with some of the requirements outlined in Tennessee Code Annotated. And this is applicable for your capital outlay notes, bond anticipation notes, tax anticipation notes, and grant anticipation notes. Examples. You issued some debt and you failed to request approval from the Office of State and Local Finance. Perhaps you bought a new truck and issued a capital outlay note and neglected to ask for approval. Or you did not receive approval from your governing board. Another example that we see on occasion is where a local government executed a lease agreement that was later determined perhaps during the independent audit that it was indeed a financing agreement. It was a finance purchase and not a lease that required approval from our office. And better terminology, often we work to bring those to conformity with statute. And what we're going to do is if you find yourself in this situation, don't panic. Just give our office a call and we are going to do all that we can to bring that into conformity with the law, and retroactive approval is permitted through the law. And if for some reason what's occurred is not addressed, just ABC in the law, we're going to work with you and we're going to do what we can to make sure that you come into compliance with that. Debt default. Right now, we're only aware of 2 entities that are actually in default. Tennessee law is permissive law, and it does not permit our local governments to file for bankruptcy. Instead, there are protective hedges built in Tennessee law to make sure that you don't go into default. For instance, like with the budget approval, with the wastewater financing board, we have different controls, what we call our institutional framework, where we're trying to promote financial responsibility at the local level. But there's 2 types of default. There's monetary default, which is when a local government does not pay interest or principal to its lenders on time or in full. And then there's technical default, and this results from not meeting conditions on a loan agreement other than your scheduled payments. And some of those bond covenants that Steve was talking about earlier. Remedies, for a utility system that finds themselves in default, there are some remedies. Whenever you're in default on debt, that's going to be disclosed in your audit report. That long-term debt that was not being paid will become current, and there's going to be no disclosure. And our audit group, they're going to see that and notify the Water and Wastewater Financing Board. And that board's going to work with your utility system to make sure that you are charging rates sufficient to become current on that debt. Then here's Tennessee Code Annotated Title 921 again. Because whenever you issue debt under that title and chapter, we're looking at your budget. We are looking in the Office of State and Local Finance to make sure that you have that you have budgeted for all debt service. Not just debt issued under 921, but we're looking for that balanced budget. We're looking to make sure that all your debt's paid. So this is another remedy. And when we look at that, and if we see that you've not budgeted sufficient money, we can actually direct your governing body to increase revenue or to adjust their estimates and their expenses. The bondholders, our law also requires remedy for bondholders. I know Steve had mentioned sometimes utility systems might have general obligation and revenue bonds combined, that double barrel debt. And in those situations, our law gives the bondholders the authority to bring suit to require the local government to respond, to take action in a responsible way to make sure that that debt is indeed paid. Time for the fun quiz. Let's see what we have here. And this is, I want to reinforce everything that we've talked about today and to help you, just to learn. So which of the following is not one of the 4 basic principles for debt management? A, understand the transaction. B, explain to citizens what is being considered. C, avoid conflicts of interest. D, lease, don't buy. Or E, disclose costs and risk. And the correct answer is D, lease, don't buy. That is not one of the 4 basic principles. You'll recall that Steve stressed the importance of understanding the transaction, explaining to citizens what's being considered, avoiding conflicts of interest, and disclosing those costs. Which of the following statements are true about balloon indebtedness structures? A, it delays the repayment of principal. B, it requires approval of the comptroller of the Treasury. C, it has substantially level or declining debt service. D, it results in lower interest costs. E, both A and B, or F, both C and D. I'll give you just a second to think about that one. And the answer is both A and B. You'll recall that the problem with balloon indebtedness is that it delays that repayment of principal out into future years, and that's what causes distress. And it also requires approval from the Comptroller of the Treasury, the Office of State and Local Finance. But it's not C because it is not substantially level or declining debt service, and it's not D because, as a rule, it will result in higher interest costs. Which of the following debt issues require prior approval? And the key word here is approval by the Office of State and Local Finance. A, capital outlay notes. B, revenue and GO refunding bonds. C, capital leases. Or D, revenue and GO bonds, or general obligation bonds. And the correct answer is A, capital outlay notes. The reason that it's not B is because our office, we issue a report for transparency that will go to your governing body when you refund bonds. And it's not C because we do not approve capital leases. You do have to issue that report on debt obligation to us for capital lease, but we do not approve capital leases. And it's not D because likewise we do not approve new money, revenue, and general obligation bonds. True or false? A local government issues capital outlay notes contrary to requirements of state law. Yes, we're going to gasp at that. Once discovered, the local government is without hope. And the answer is false. Of course there is hope. We want you to call one of our financial analysts and talk with them, and they are going to work to make sure that you have a valid obligation. A local government issues revenue bonds. The proceeds are used to pay for the replacement of deteriorating water pipes. Pursuant to Tennessee law, a report on debt obligation must be filed with its governing body and a copy to the Office of State and Local Finance. A, 45 days prior to issuing the debt. B, no later than 45 days after issuing the debt. C, within 24 hours of issuance of the debt. Or D, in blue ink. How many thought D? The correct answer is B, no later than 45 days after issuing that debt. And our final question is, what is the official state tree, cultivated flower, fruit, and one of 2 insects in Tennessee? Is it A, the tulip poplar, iris, persimmon, and tick? Is it B, the dogwood, iris, blackberry, and honeybee? Or is it C, the tulip poplar, daffodil, strawberry, and firefly? Or is it D, the tulip poplar, iris, tomato, and ladybug? And if you guessed D, you are correct. It's the tulip poplar, the iris, the tomato, which is a fruit, and the ladybug. And the firefly or the lightning bug is the other insect. And I want to thank you so much for joining us here today in the class, and also for those of you who have joined online. And I want to close with contact information for our financial analysts that I've referred to throughout this presentation. You'll see that we have them arranged by alphabet. So if you see where your city, your county, or your authority falls in the alphabetic range, you'll be talking with Lori Bernard, Steve Osborne, or Ron Queen, and they will help you if you want any more information about what we talked about today. Thank you.
Come on in, Jackie.
Can I come in? Ain't got shot yet? Hey, look. There you go. How you doing, bud? Something messed with you. Right. Oh, man.
Where you broke?
Ricky?
Yeah.